Spring of life that gives us light from on high. Would you light our way? Give light to those that live in darkness, shadow, death. Would you guide us home? Lead us to the way of peace. Father, would you guide our feet into the way of peace?
Good morning, you all. Our scripture today is from Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. Amen.
Be with you all today. A little easier getting up this week than it was last week. Was it not? Yes, it was. And it's great to be able to finish and bring this series to a conclusion as well today. You may know the name Flannery O'Connor. She's a great Roman Catholic short story writer, and she once remarked that she had an aunt who told her that she thought that nothing really happened in any of her stories unless at the end somebody got married or somebody got shot. Somebody got married or somebody got shot. Now, I think old Aunt what's-her-name O'Connor kind of had a point, because you don't go to a movie just to leave without knowing whether Tom Cruise lives or Tom Cruise dies at the end. You're like thinking that, Tom, just die and let me cry, or live and let me cheer. You know, like you want to know, did somebody get shot? Did somebody get married? Did they live? Did they die? You know, finish the story. Give me an ending. Now, in the Bible, we know how Abraham's story ends. We know how Moses' story ends, David's story ends, the disciples' stories, many of theirs end. But Jeremiah, the author of the longest book in the Bible, what about him? Well, we know his nation is left in shambles, and we know Jeremiah is hauled off to Egypt where? Well, we don't know. We don't know. We don't know if he got married. We don't know if he got shot. His was a story without an ending. So what could help him keep his head held high in uncertainty? What could help him keep his courage in the face of ambiguity? May I suggest what kept his courage all the way to the end of whatever end was his end was this word of the Lord right here. It's the longest passage from the Old Testament quoted in the New, because like Jeremiah, I know some of you, maybe many of you, face uncertain futures today. You face despair, you face pain, you face illness. You want to know, will I be healed? Will my marriage make it? Will I get married at all if I want to? Will my children love God? Will I become somebody in my lifetime? How do we live when we don't know the end? I think we could live the same way Jeremiah did, out of the depth of resource, the power of something called the New Covenant. The New Covenant, what is that? Let's try to see today. What is the New Covenant? Let's discover, as we see, four things about it. Number one, there's a pattern to it. Number two, there's a problem around it. Number three, there's a puzzle in it. And finally, there's a power from it. Now, alliteration apparently is always appropriate. All right, see what I did there. Number one, all right. But when it comes to the new covenant, there is a pattern which this passage actually points us to. And the pattern is this, that the God of the Bible is a covenantal God. That is to say, he always and only relates to you and me on the basis of a covenant. This is called one of the attributes of God. So what does covenant mean? Well, last year, my wife, Carrie, started going through some of our recurring bills. Maybe you've done this, and we started looking at the companies that we do business with, and she's called a number of them up to let them know that we had decided to switch or cancel just based purely on our budget. And the funniest thing happened because we called repeatedly, just because she called and had a conversation, many of them on the spot, without even being prompted, reduced the monthly amount they were charging us by a significant percentage, some as much as half. And now you're like, well, I'm glad I came today to church. Morgan, you give me a plan for my afternoon once I get home. Yeah. Well, company after company have been increasing our rates bit by bit, year after year. And when she called not to bargain, not to hassle or haggle, not to negotiate, just to end it, they nearly all massively dropped their rates. Now, of course, while we were glad to pay less, to tell you the truth, for me, I was a little frustrated. She'd tell you that because I started to ask her, like, man, is this how all of this works? You know, like, you keep charging me more and more until I put my foot down and get mad about it and make a phone call. It doesn't feel like you're out for your customer's best interest. It just feels like all we are is dollar signs to you. And the reason I think it feels that way is that's kind of how it is. Our relationship with a lot of those companies, it's just professional. It's not personal. It's transactional. It's not tenderhearted. It's consumeristic, not covenantal. So on one hand, you know, I don't blame him. I mean, companies have the money. People need jobs. I hope they all become millionaires. But on the other hand, I don't blame me either for wanting to switch or quit, because if you can offer me better eggs at a better price at a better store, well then, buddy, I'm all yours, you know? So the economy is one thing, but now sociologists tell us we live in a culture where the forces, the influences of consumerism have sort of burst the banks of goods and services, and that force has made its way into hearts and homes. We are way more familiar with the language of contract. We're less familiar with the language of covenant. But the best and most meaningful relationships that you and I have, the ones that make life worth living, are not contractual. They are covenantal. What does that look like? Well, this past week, a certain spectacularly attractive couple in this very church celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary, if you can believe it, yes. And it's true, judging by appearance alone, Carrie and I got married when we were like 12 or 13 or something. That's totally not weird. I'm just kidding, that didn't happen. But when we did get married, when we stood by that lake out in California where the palm trees sway. Back in 2001, in the shadow of Y2K. We held hands while looking good. That day, we gazed into each other's eyes and we did say, you're welcome for the impromptu poem, by the way. Oh, yes. We stood and we swore this. We swore, I will love you till death do us part. We swore to always be faithful, rich or poor, sickness and in health, all that. We swore, and then we signed. We made a covenant, because a covenant is both legal and loving. It's more than legal because it is deeply loving, and it's more than loving and emotions because it's legal. So to walk away would cost us in every way. This is why, by the way, living together is not the Bible's vision for couples. You may be giving your body, sure, maybe giving your emotions, but you haven't given everything. You're still holding something back, but in a covenant, you don't. See, covenant relationships, the point is, blend law and love in ways that deeply transform each party. And from the beginning of our scriptures as Christians, of our story, God has always said, I am a God of covenant. I mean, when he created the first humans, he gave us something called the covenant of life. When Noah stepped out of the ark later, he gave humanity another covenant. Then Abraham got a covenant. Moses got a covenant. I mean, it's like Oprah with covenant. Like, you get a covenant, you get a covenant. We all get covenants. Hebrew people got another one called the Old Covenant. I will be their God, he said. They'll be my people. I'll be like a husband to them. They'll be like my bride. That's who this God is. That's his calling card. That's his pattern in the world. He doesn't work on the basis of contract, aren't you glad? He didn't work on the basis of condition or commitment, but on the basis of covenant. And yet, something wasn't quite right with the pattern. And we know something wasn't quite right because the writer of the New Testament book of Hebrews, looking right back at Jeremiah 31 later, he tells us this. He said, for if there had been nothing wrong with that first Mosaic, referring to Moses, not us, covenant, no place would have been sought for another. So what was wrong? What was the problem with the pattern? That's number two. There's a problem. God himself references the problem with the old covenant. The days are coming, he said, when I'm going to make a new covenant. It'll not be like the old one I made when I took them out of the hand and lead them out of Egypt because, here it is, they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. So the problem was the people kept breaking God's covenant. Specifically, he's referring to the one they made with him back at Mount Sinai. He rescued them from slavery, took them into the desert. They swore that they would be his people, that God would be their God. And then God gave them two things, both parts of a covenant. He gave them laws and he gave them love. He gave them laws to obey in the Decalogue, in the Ten Commandments, and he gave them love to receive in the tabernacle, that big tent in the desert where they'd go to confess their sin, make a sacrifice, receive God's love. They would offer that and be forgiven. The old covenant had laws and the old covenant had love. The problem was the people, God's people, kept breaking both. They kept on not keeping their wedding vows. They kept on breaking God's laws, and they stopped returning for his love. So what could be done? I mean, come on, this is a real problem for God. If you're a covenantal being, if people aren't disposable to you, if you're not a transactional being, what are you gonna do? It's a problem. It takes, two to tango, right? I mean, you could even say it takes two to make a thing go right, but only one party did make it go right. God kept his part, but the people couldn't keep his law and his love together. Man by the name of Sinclair Ferguson, he's an old Scottish pastor and preacher. He's written like 50 books, and he famously said that when people, as a pastor, when people came to see him, he came to know that he had like one job to do. One job to do as a pastor. He had to figure out whether he should disturb a comfortable person or comfort a disturbed person. He said, I gotta figure out what kind of person am I sitting with. Do I need to comfort the afflicted or to afflict the comfortable? And I want you to know today, you call me up, you get on my calendar, come see me, I'm gonna do the same for you, all right? He said that because he knew that just about everybody had a struggle with either law or love. He had to figure it out and minister appropriately. And based on temperament, culture, upbringing, whatever, everybody's got kind of a struggle with one or the other. Someone would come into his office feeling discouraged, depressed, ashamed, insecure, and they would need to be comforted by the love of God. But then someone would come in needing to be confronted with the moral law of God, like they're lying and they're totally fine with it, or they're being a big jerk and putting themselves at the center of the room, and they just keep on talking and talking. During their Oscars acceptance speech, and they tell everybody to pipe down and turn the music off because they got more to say. They're gonna be quick, but then they're not. Oh, wait, maybe you saw that, but they're comfortable with them doing them. They need to be confronted. So the afflicted need to be comforted with God's love. The comfortable need to be afflicted with God's law, so to speak. Why? Because humans can't keep law and love together. We can't do this internally. And you see this, we can't do this externally at large either, because cultures themselves tend to be either legalistic, super high pressure, super moralistic, ultra judgmental, and some of you may have left churches like that. Well, they tend to be relativist, like rules, the moral law of God, boundaries, right and wrong, those things really don't matter either, and some of you may have left churches like that. And this is why keeping them together is such a big deal, because when we don't, things go badly for us. Look at America's kids today. Look at the kids, We've told them now for decades, hey, you're fine as you are. Nobody can tell you what to do. No one can tell you what right and wrong is. Well, what's happened? Well, as godlessness has increased, as relativism has increased, anxiety has increased. Because as it turns out, when you don't trust God, you got to trust yourself, and that's a really bad option. But on the other hand, you can speak with kids raised in super high pressure, high achiever cultures and environments, all rules, everything's pre-scripted, you're gonna be a success or a bust. More law, though, also brings more anxiety. Kids raised in those cultures can be just as self-destructive and self-harming as kids in the other cultures kind of can. The point is, the old covenant shows us not a problem with God, but a problem with us. We need a new kind of covenant. We need law and love held together. Only the right blend can deeply transform us. How do we get that? That's number 3. That is the puzzle, which is hinted at right here in verse 33. This is the covenant God said, I'm gonna make with the people of Israel after that time. I'm gonna look at this, is astounding. My law, where? In their minds. I'm gonna write it where? Come on their hearts. But how can this be? How can the law, which was written in stone on tablets, now be written on human hearts? God says he's gonna do this, but how? And why? How can and why would God do this after the people did all of that to him? First, imagine there's a supervisor at your work today. Let's say, for the sake of the example, let's say this person is female. The woman's the boss. She's got a list that some of you are like, I knew she was, No, this woman's the boss in this thought experiment, and she's got a list of policies that she keeps posting as the boss. She puts them on the wall in the break room. She puts them on the staff intranet and the employee handbook. They're all over the place, company emails. So there are her and the policies on one side, and the staff and the employees on the other. And lots of the office coworkers, they start to chafe under the policies. They don't really want to comply. They're all in each other's ears all the time about how cold and rigid and uptight and distant the boss is. But let's say one day this boss came out of her office, meandered into the employee break room, and bumped into a man in there. And let's say this man and this woman hit it off. They fell in love, and the man and the woman got married. And let's say when they did that, it also didn't violate any company policy. But through their relationship and because of their love, he discovered how incredibly warm and thoughtful and just and fair and caring she was. How would her policies come across to him now? Would they come across as cold, distant, unfeeling, unthoughtful, or would he realize what kind of person had created them? And would his relationship with his beloved make him want to obey those policies? Yeah. Follow them because he believed his best interests were kept in mind? Of course. That kind of relationship would make him want to do whatever his beloved had said. And what was now only written in laminated plastic on the company wall would now come to be written on his heart. He'd follow the law out of love. The policies never changed. What did change was the depth and the type, the kind of relationship. So how could God, the Holy One, the big boss, get his law created for our good off tablets and into human hearts? Oh, can you see? We would have to bump into him in our world. God would have to come down, as it were, and bump into us, become human, and keep not just his part, which he always has, but keep our part, which humans never could. That's how the puzzle could be solved. That's how God would have to solve our problem, but why would he? Why would he do such a thing for people who had broken his heart? Well, maybe you You've seen the movie The Life of Pi. Life of Pi based on the book by Jan Martel. There's an image of both. In the book, the main character, Pi, is exploring religions. Point of the whole thing, and he's kind of leaning towards Hinduism. And in the story, he strikes up a conversation with a Roman Catholic priest. Some of you may remember this scene. He tells the main character about Jesus and about Christ's sacrifice for humanity on the cross. And the main character starts to kind of freak out. I mean, this is incredible for him. He doesn't get why Jesus, who claimed to be God, would do this and die. And in the book, Pi says this. He says that a God should put up with adversity. Well, that I could understand. The gods of Hinduism face their fair share of thieves, bullies, kidnappers, and usurpers. I mean, what is the Ramayana but an account of one long bad day for Rama? Adversity? Yes. Reversals of fortune? Yes. Treachery? Yes. But humiliation? Death? I couldn't imagine Lord Krishna consenting to be stripped naked, whipped, mocked, dragged to the streets, and to top it off, crucified at the hands of mere humans to boot. I had never heard of a Hindu god dying. This was wrong. Father Martin assured me it was real. Why would God wish that upon himself? Why not leave death to mortals? Love was Father Martin's answer. Love. Love. Love is why God would come out of his office, so to speak, and offer himself. And this is where now all the puzzle pieces come together. Jesus Christ as God came into our world and died for love because of the law. He didn't just die because he loved us. No, he died because we couldn't keep God's just laws. And you ought to be thankful for this. God really cares about right and wrong and justice. He cares about all the ways the people have done you wrong, did you dirty, mistreated you, didn't think about you, were uncaring towards you. God cares about all the ways you've been hurt at the hands of others, and God cares about all the people who have been hurt and mistreated at your hands, mine as well. See, the death we mortals deserved for evil and injustice went on to Jesus so that the life he deserved for his perfect law-keeping morality could come on to us. That is the heart of the gospel. And when we say, Jesus, change me, come into my life, would you change my heart? Put your love and law in my heart. Now that love of God floods us, and obeying the one who did all this for us becomes a delight. Remember how earlier I said that a covenant deeply transforms both parties? You're like, yeah, but I can see how, this covenant would change and transform us. But what about God? What about the other party? How did that new covenant transform God? I mean, come on now. Think about it. The new covenant did transform God for the first time. He became human. He put on skin. He became human. God suffered the night Christ was betrayed. He was with his friends at his last dinner. He quoted Jeremiah 31, and he says, there is a new covenant coming, and what? My blood. I will pay. I have kept the old covenant so that you can have the new. Does God care about love? Does he care about the law? At the cross, come on the cross, the answer is yes. And only the Christian faith blend law and love like this. And now when Jesus Christ comes into your life with his love, having kept the law, now number 4, finally, I love this. There's a power. There's a power. And that power is this. It's in the final words of Jeremiah's poem here. He says, no, I'm going to preach this to you real good because I like this part. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. See, the power the new covenant brings is the power to know God. Not just to know about him, like about an athlete or a celebrity. I mean, you can know where Rihanna or Tay-Tay or George Clooney or Michael Jordan or LeBron James were born. You can know like their pets' names or their scoring records or their greatest hits, but you don't know them, and they don't know you. You only know about them. But God said, I'm bringing a new covenant. It's not like the old one based on your deeds. It's a new one based on mine. Why? So you can know God. This, hear me, is the heart, the gift of the Christian faith. This is, as it were, the pearl of great price. It cost God. The reason Jesus came, John 17, it was so that you can know God. So do you? Do you know? Do you know God and Jesus Christ, whom he has sent? If you're here today, and even if you grew up in church, let's say you growing up in this church, do you know God? Or do you just know some facts about him, like born in Bethlehem, had a pet goat once upon a time, and from his buddies, his name's Peter and Paul, I know his friends, greatest hit, Sermon on the Mount, that was a good one. I'm not asking whether you've read about him, heard about him, learned about him. Those are good. Those are not, though, the gifts or the power of the new covenant. Do you know him? Maybe you're here, you grew up in another faith system. You're a guest today. I'm so thankful you're here. I'm sure if I had grown up where you'd grown up, been taught what you've been taught, I would think like you think, feel how you feel, maybe believe what you believe. But when Jesus Christ said, you can know me as God, I'm not just like God, I'm not just like an avatar, but I am God. Do you know him? And for those of you who would say, well, I think I do, but I don't feel it today, let me encourage you not to remain, hear me, in a state of spiritual poverty. Because in a marriage covenant, though, yeah, two parties might have made a covenant, there can be feelings of drifting or disconnection, but what does it take to reconnect? It takes time. It takes vulnerability. It takes nakedness together before one another. And Christ has already done this. His part, naked on the cross for you, became totally vulnerable. There's no part of himself he's kept from you. And even if others forsake you, by the way, he never will. But you can know him and live out of that power. So let's apply this gift promise power briefly. Let me give you one of the best ways I've come to know how to know him better. Here it is. Whenever I hear a sermon, maybe like this, I read the Bible, passage of scripture, I ask this question, which we're gonna ask and sit with. I ask, why this passage for me right now? Why this passage, God, for me right now? Like, what do you have for me today through what I've heard? What do you have for me through what I've read right now? And when I sit with that question, now I find my walls going down. I find myself becoming vulnerable before my Maker. I find his love flooding in. I find I come to know him better. And here's why that matters. It's because most days, thankfully, you won't get shot and you won't get married. That is to say, most days, your story, it's ambiguous, it's inconclusive, there's no end to it. How can we function, move on, face uncertainty, ambiguity, illness, pain, insecurity? Oh, we face these things the same way Jeremiah did, except only better, because he had just a glimpse of this, and it kept him the rest of his life. We can see fully what's in the new covenant because of Jesus. Today, friend, you can know God. So let's sit with that question I just asked for just a minute. Our band's gonna come out here. They're gonna begin to play and minister to us, but let's ask this question. I'd like to ask you to pray this, if you would, out loud with me right now. Here we go. Say, God, why this for me now? Lord, would you speak to us now in these moments? God, as we sit before you in this moment, hearts open, we ask that you'd come and speak. Thank you for your living word, which addresses us and sustains us. Thank you for the power of the new covenant. In Christ's name.